It's nearly impossible to have a conversation about education in Delaware today without talking about the poor academic performance and disciplinary problems at so many traditional public schools, especially in the city of Wilmington. With us today as our first person to discuss possible solutions is Dorrell Green, head of Governor Carney's new Office of Innovation and Improvement in the Department of Education. Welcome to First.
Hi, good morning, Chris. Thank you.
Well, you gave up the assistant superintendent's job at Brandywine and you took a $19,000 pay cut to take this job. Why accept this challenge?
Well, I can actually go back and say getting an education, I knew I never was going to strike it rich to begin with, but I truly feel that it's a calling. I mean, it's something that I'm passionate about. I began my professional career teaching at Bancroft Elementary as a sixth grade teacher. I had the opportunity to teach fourth grade and become a dean of students at Stubbs. Intermediate at the time, and then I was an assistant principal and principal at Bayard before it transitioned to become a middle school. So it truly isn't about the money. It's a vocation, it's a lifelong passion for me. I mean, I've had people pour into me as educators. I got an educator as a result of a teacher who was passionate about me, so I figured, you know, it's my due diligence as a lifelong educator to take this position and see what I can do based on past successes that I've had both as an educator, as a teacher, as well as a school leader to help support and turn the schools around within the city of Wilmington.
Now, your task is a gargantuan one. For example, at Bayard, where you were, reading proficiency is 8%, math proficiency is 3%. What makes you think now you can make a difference there at schools like Bayard and other low-performing, high-poverty schools?
Yeah, and that's one measure of school success. Ultimately, I think we have to look at the schools as epicenters of the community, and how can we allow the schools to support the community as a whole. I mean, and when you look at the level of trauma that those children experience within the community, when you look at community violence and the things that they experience, that becomes a microcosm in terms of what the schools ultimately see. You know, so reading proficiency, math proficiency are issues, but those are one indicator of school success. So hopefully, you know, with the support and working in collaboration with Cortina School District, you know, we can work to build systems that are sustainable over time. I think that's the other thing that you see with school reform. Most often we put programs and supports in place that unfortunately aren't sustainable. They break down, systems break down, and then ultimately the children end up being the ones that suffer. So it's a holistic approach to really looking at community supports, looking at the health and well-being of the children, and then we can work on, you know, gaining the academic performance.
So at Bayard or Stubbs or Bancroft, where you've been, tell our viewers about a winning strategy you've employed that's helped with performance or behavior.
Actually, you know, interesting enough, September 11th, you know, most we can mark where we were that unfaithful day. I was actually teaching fourth grade and actually started my week at Stubbs, you know, where I really was able to cut my teeth as an educator. An example would be, I had 41 children as a fourth grade teacher with 17 identified special ed students when I started teaching fourth grade at Stubbs Intermediate at the time. And the principal, who was Cheryl Arnold at the time, we had open house, you know, back to school night. We may have had 4 families that showed up to participate. And I was kind of deflated as an educator. And one of the things that I asked her, I said, can we do something a little different for our first marking period parent-teacher conference? And she let me think creatively. And one of the things that I scheduled was a family fun night. You know, me and my teacher partner, we ordered pizzas, we had games, got parents to come. I had 21 parents show up that night for a family fun night. We had supports where we had the siblings of the families go to another room, continue to play games. And once we captured the parents, we shared their students' academic progress, and from there we built that relationship. You know, most often one of the things that I think we have to do, not only when we teach children or teach children how to read, we have to ask ourselves the question, what do the supports look like at home, and how can we as educators in schools and leaders be advocates for the very families who we have that expectation that they're going to set up homework help at home. That might be challenging for a lot of our families. So how can we help bring those supports and bring those systems? And we were able at that time, because we did use DIBELS, which is a reading indicator, we were able to have about 92% reading efficiency in terms of benchmarking with our children based on an assessment. So it's about relationships at the end of the day. How can you cultivate and have authentic, meaningful relationships with children and their families to make that connection to the academic piece?
Now, how important is a principal in a school? Most educators tell me that's the most important person. And are you looking, will you be evaluating principals to see whether changes are needed?
It's not necessarily a means of evaluating principals. I think it's as much as it is supporting principals. I mean, being a former principal myself, it's a grueling job. I mean, there are a lot of expectations that come from both top down and from the bottom up. You know, there are a lot of expectations, whether it be from your central office, from the state, and then the community as a whole. So how can we not only help principals be good managers of schools, but effective instructional leaders? And, you know, how can they be able to go into a classroom and give a teacher a good reflection on teaching practices, but also hold an audience through a parent involvement or community engagement event? How do they solicit and get community partners to not only help them with the academic piece, but the community piece of supporting a school and the whole child? So yeah, it's really a means of not only looking at necessarily evaluating the performance, but really looking at how can we help principals be more effective in their job to build out the systems that are necessary to help turn these schools around.
So one phenomenon I've observed in the schools is that a lot of Delaware families are leaving the traditional public schools for choice schools or charter schools. And that leaves a lot of schools with very low capacity. Is it feasible to consolidate or close some of these buildings so taxpayer monies can be used more efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, you know, ultimately that's up to what we call the LEAs, the local education agencies, to really look at their feeder patterns and how they're drawing their feeder patterns. I think from the Office of Innovation and Support is how can we help collaborate and bring that collaborative spirit not only, again, to the schools themselves, but the community as a whole. Charters are a part of the community, so we have to come to that realization. And where is the collaboration? Charters fill a special niche group of clientele in most instances because they have themes, or, you know, First State Montessori, for example, you know, certain families are attracted to those entities. Sure. But it's really how can we look to collaborate? And I think for anything, it goes back to that school climate. If parents feel that their children are safe and in an orderly, clean environment that really engages their children and them as families in learning, they probably be more likely or more apt to take advantage of their public option. So it's really how can we get back to really grassroots, engaging the community and really working with the families who feed into those particular schools. How can we engage them and get their insight? You know, what do they feel is working? What do they feel are other areas of support? And make some meaningful change that is going to impact it day one on the ground, as opposed to, you know, us sitting in what perceived to be our ivory towers, making decisions that really don't engage the community.
Okay. Well, it's been great speaking with you about all these formidable challenges. Dorrell Green is director of the new Office of Innovation and Improvement at the Delaware Department of Education. Check out this interview in its entirety at newsworks.org/Delaware.